Welcome back, welcome back. My guest in this segment is Todd Harrison. He's the Chief Investment Officer of CB1 Capital. Todd, welcome.
Thank you, James.
Todd, give us an overview. What does CB1 Capital do?
We're a hedge fund that invests in cannabinoid wellness strategies. So really looking at cannabis through the lens of wellness, pretty wide berth in terms of wellness, but in particular efficacy-driven solutions. We think that this is going to be a bit of disruption for Western healthcare.
Wow, no kidding. Yeah, you're preaching to the converted here. So when you say hedge fund, are your investors mostly the general public or other institutional? What sort of investor matrix are we talking here?
Typically high net worth investors, family offices, some institutions. This is a space that is widely misunderstood, as you know, and as we have our conversations with folks across the investment landscape, you really find all kinds here. And most people, even those who believe they get it, still think this is about growing cannabis and smoking cannabis. And we try to explain to them that this is just an ingredient. Cannabis and hemp are ingredients, and it's pretty ubiquitous in terms of the output. So we're real excited about a secular bull market, and even more excited when people don't seem to get it.
Right. And I get the sense, looking at your name and everything, that you're focused on the CBD side of things, not so much on the THC, implying more medicinal than recreational, or is that just a misconception on my part?
Yeah, no, the CB1 receptor is a receptor in the human body and in anything with the vertebrae. So the science is very much focused on reaching the CB1 and the CB2 receptors, which is different than CBD. CBD is one cannabinoid, seems to be all the rage these days, but it's one of many. THC, of course, is sort of the, as Ethan Russo likes to say it, the good cannabinoid, bad cannabinoid, but certainly very therapeutic in its applications. But there's a whole host of the minor cannabinoids, which is where we get really excited in terms of CBN for sleep and just a number of other different applications that we think this gets into in terms of wellness.
Well, Todd, I can see that you know way more about the endocannabinoid system than I do, and that's annoying as hell. However, I will put aside my momentary childlike frustration and try to learn something here. What level of knowledge can we have about these minor cannabinoids at this time, since it's been such a long, dark history of suppression of research?
Yep, and I see what you did there, James. But I'll go along with it. Certainly there are no experts in the cannabinoid space. We believe there are explorers, there are pioneers. But even those who are furthest along the pathway will tell you that we don't know a lot more than we do know about this. But that's sort of the exciting part, right? We do know that it's efficacious in certain arenas. Obviously, Epidiolex with GW proved that. The Class 5 from the DEA on the U.S. side demonstrates that. That's one of our favorite positions, of course. But certainly, we think there's a lot to learn and a lot more that's going to go through the clinical process, because Western medicine, as you know, it's the not invented here process. So if they don't know it, then it can't be true. So this has to go through the proper processes, as we say.
Okay, let's talk a bit about how do you allocate capital? Where are your areas of focus? Where are the areas that you stay away from?
Yeah, no, great question. So we look at the capital chain sort of with the Canadian majors listed on the U.S. as being obviously the most well-known, the most I guess endeared in the perception of the public. But as you look at the Canadian majors that are listed in Canada, then we find, I think, a lot of relative value there. And as you go down that food chain, or downstream, as we say, the less liquidity there is, the less institutional presence there is, the more of a relative edge we find, the more price mismatching we find down the stream. So it goes through the U.S., so we'll see more migrate to the U.S. Obviously, we're seeing that now. But ultimately, we look at Canada, we look at the biotech side, which is where we have about a third of our capital right now. We think biotech's about to take the baton in terms of efficacy-driven solutions, right? So we see the beverages, the nutraceuticals, the consumer packaged goods on one side, and certainly very exciting on the other side. We see efficacy-driven solutions. So we look at that as an exciting space. And Australia, we think, is coming up on the tail end in terms of future markets.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds to me like you think that the bigger future is on the medical side more so than the recreational side.
Well, we think the future is on the wellness side, and we think wellness has a pretty wide berth. And we don't really differentiate between the buckets in terms of opportunities because we believe that a fair amount of self-medication has been going on through the years. This has been a very misunderstood, a very demonized drug. There's been a fair amount of misinformation and propaganda that's been put out into the marketplace. And I think as people understand that this is actually good for you, this is efficacious, that this is therapeutic, that it's going to open up all sorts of new markets, and that's what we're focused on.
Yeah, that's incredible. You and I are on the same page in so many ways. Do you consume CBDs as a matter of personal wellness?
I do. I've made no bones about it. I actually got away from a lot of the prescription poison with my medical card in New York State, and certainly a big proponent of this as an alternative therapy. The side effect profile is de minimis relative to what sort of we grew up on in terms of medication. So I think this is going to really help and save a lot of lives going forward. We look at things like Florida with the elderly population being really ground zero for cannabinoid wellness, 3.5 times the national prescription average. I mean, this is going to really ripple through society in ways that I don't think people are prepared for.
Yeah, no, I could not agree more. I tell people that just imagine a world where every single living man, woman, child, and pet has CBDs in their medicine cabinet, and that is nothing less than the full potential of this market, just as you say, on a wellness side. So that's great. I'm so glad we're meeting. It's been too long. We've got to get together.
Yes.
So what are the big sort of opportunities that really excite you that might be under the radar of the average investor and that we probably haven't even talked about too much on our show?
Yeah, no, I think that, two things. One, from a top-down macro standpoint, the idea that, there's probably, if you roll in all of the IPOs that are coming to market, and there's a lot of IPOs that are coming to market in the next 6 weeks, but if you roll all of those into the public market cap space, as we've been saying, it's about 100 billion of global equity market cap. You look at cannabis right now as a $300 billion cash crop. So if you contemplate the optionality of the end products and the use cases, we don't see any reason this can't be a $2 to $3 trillion market in 10 years. So by orders of magnitude, we think the stock market is off sides here. But in terms from bottoms up, we do think, as I alluded to before, we think biotech's going to be the next sort of leader in phase 2 of the secular bull market. We have holdings like GW Pharmaceuticals. Corbis is another one, even though it's down today. We own these positions. We think they're going to take the mantle in terms of, or the baton rather, in terms of this next leg of the race.
Wow, that's awesome. How do you feel about the biosynthetic generators like Ginkgo that's owned by Kronos and Hyacinth that's partly owned by Organogram? Do you think those companies have a huge future?
Yes, absolutely we do. We actually like Kronos because of this deal, and certainly Organogram is one of our core holdings in Canada. Village Farms is another one. CanTrust is another one. We think those are sort of the chosen three that is going to get the love as more people do the work. But we think biosynthetics are sort of the future for things like cosmetics and vanity, more so than maybe the edibles or the beverages, but certainly they'll have their applications. It's going to save money. It's going to save time. And we have some of those names in our portfolio as sort of the next, as sort of the biotech side of the equation that we think is going to take the next leg higher. So biosynthetics certainly have a role in the forward future of cannabis, in our opinion.
Sure. Do you think that there's much risk in the U.S. marketplace in terms of oversupply of cannabis causing price compression that will ultimately have a calming effect on the number of companies able to stay above water as a result of that?
Well, certainly on the supply side, and we've kind of made no bones about our point of view that this isn't about farming as much as it is about the major LPs are really biotechs and drag, and they're nutraceutical companies and beverage companies, and they have sort of the optionality of their revenue streams in front of them, which is very exciting. We try to steer clear from the front end of that because we do believe that cannabis, if not a commodity like hemp, is certainly commoditized to a degree. But we differ from the conventional wisdom that this is a negative for the space. We actually think it's one of the more bullish elements going forward is that the API, the input costs are going to go down as the price of cannabis goes down, which is going to be very helpful on the back end for margins for companies that focus on things like that. The Canna Royalties of the world, which we own, and a number of other companies that are focusing on the back end. One of the reasons we like the MPX Ianthus marriage so much is MPX, their extraction routes and sort of what they're doing there on the product side. So we're very excited about that. I know you didn't ask me about it, but certainly there were 2 5% positions of ours that got married or are planning to get married. And we couldn't be happier about the deal. We're big fans of both Hadley and Beth.
Yeah, okay. Actually, I was going to ask you about that because we had Hadley here just before you, and we're having Scott Boyce here just after you. So tell me about the features of that deal that from an investor's point of view are net positive.
Sure. So the number one focus of ours is really the limited overlap on the footprint, right? I think it's just Massachusetts that they overlap there. So they're really expanding their reach. They're really looking at a bird's eye view of sort of their strategy. So that's number one. Number two, we look at the extraction side of MPX is really, that's where the margins are. And that's a really smart strategy to be going forward. And the brand side of the equation certainly is where we want to be investing in on a forward basis. And then finally, by our pen, MPX will do 100 million next year, maybe 300 million in 2020. This is accretive. And if you're going to make a case for the equity prices of a lot of these companies, you have to sort of buy into the idea that they're going to buy their way, merge their way into better multiples through accretive deals, and this certainly probably checks that box on a few levels. So we haven't sold any. We have both Ianthus and MPX, and we're holding on to both for now. We think both stocks, or the stock comes out of this, moves higher.
Wow, that's interesting. All the names that you're in, I'm in. It's like it's just amazing. Are there any companies or situations out there that you think are worthy of warning to investors that you feel comfortable talking about, or is that something you'd rather stay away from?
It's not so much. We don't hedge. We have non-correlated hedges in the S&P and the Nasdaq against a lot of cannabinoid wellness holdings in our portfolio. We think it's a little early on the curve to be short these names. I mean, we've dabbled on the short side. There are some valuation discrepancies, but having traded, I've been trading 30 years. I've seen a fair amount of bubbles and busts in that time, and it's not a valuation story right now as much as a footprint story, and as much as really trying to meet that chasm between perception and reality. We think there's certainly a lot of noise out there still, a lot of images of Cheech and Chong when you think about cannabis. And, until we see sort of the awareness that this is actually something that's very good for society, it's very good for jobs, it's very good for tax revenue, it's very good for the patients, and it's certainly going to be very good for investors. So we think we're in the early innings still. If there's any concerns, possibly you might, throw out there that there's a lot of companies coming public on the U.S. side. We like to call it the fangification of U.S. cannabis is in the process of occurring. So there's a lot of paper coming in the next 6 weeks. So there might be a short-term saturation, but again, we think we're early in the story.
Todd, you have been a very enlightening guest, and I've really enjoyed this conversation. I would like to come back to you regularly, and I would like to come down to New York and meet you and take you out for a beer or lunch or dinner or something. But we're going to leave it there for now. I'm definitely going to be coming back to you regularly. Thank you so much for your participation today.
Thank you. Thank you. Big fan of what you guys are doing.